Tajikistan A country with Muslims, but you can't practice Islam. Tajikistan. Did you know that about 98% of Tajikistan's population is Muslim? But there's a twist. The practice of Islam here is under tight government regulations. Stick around as I unravel this fascinating yet complex story. Tajikistan is nestled in the heart of Central Asia, surrounded by its rugged mountains and stunning natural beauty. Almost every Tajik, yes, a whopping 98%, identifies as Muslim. The majority of them practice Sunni Islam. But what does that actually mean in terms of daily life here? Let me tell you, it's a mix of rich traditions and strict regulations.
Tajikistan is indeed a predominantly Muslim country, with about 98% of its population identifying as Muslim, primarily Sunni Islam. However, the practice of Islam in Tajikistan is subject to strict government regulations. The government has implemented various measures to control religious practices, such as registration requirements. Religious groups must register with the government, and unregistered religious activities are prohibited. Restrictions on religious education. There are limitations on religious education for children, and religious instruction is only allowed in state-approved institutions. Control over religious leaders. The government appoints and monitors religious leaders, and sermons are often subject to government approval. Dress code regulations. There are restrictions on Islamic dress, such as the hijab, in public institutions. These measures are part of the government's efforts to maintain secularism and prevent extremism, but they also significantly limit the freedom to practice Islam openly and freely. Tajikistan's strict religious policies have deep historical roots, influenced by various political and social factors. Soviet legacy. During the Soviet era, there was a strong push to secularize society and suppress religious practices. This included closing mosques, persecuting religious leaders, and promoting atheism. Although the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, the legacy of these policies continued to influence Tajikistan's approach to religion. Post-independence civil war. After gaining independence in 1991, Tajikistan experienced a brutal civil war, 1992 to 1997, between the government and Islamist opposition groups. This conflict heightened the government's fear of religious extremism and led to increased control over religious activities to maintain stability and prevent future conflicts. Government control and secularism. The Tajik government, under President Emomali Rahman, has emphasized secularism and national unity. To this end, it has implemented laws to regulate religious practices, such as requiring religious groups to register with the government and restricting religious education. Anti-extremism measures. In response to global concerns about terrorism and extremism, Tajikistan has enacted laws to monitor and control religious activities. This includes surveillance of religious leaders, restrictions on religious attire, and limitations on religious gatherings. These historical factors have shaped Tajikistan's current religious policies, aiming to balance secular governance with the need to prevent extremism. President Emomali Rahman has been a central figure in Tajikistan's political landscape since the early 1990s. His policies have significantly shaped the country's governance and socio-political environment. Here are some key aspects of his policies. Constitutional reforms. Rahman has overseen several constitutional changes to consolidate his power. Notably, in 2016, a referendum removed term limits for the presidency, allowing him to potentially remain in power for life. Economic policies. His administration has focused on economic development, particularly in infrastructure projects like the Rogun Dam, which aims to make Tajikistan a major electricity exporter. However, the economy remains heavily reliant on remittances from Tajik workers abroad. Rahman's government has implemented strict measures to control religious practices and curb extremism. This includes monitoring religious leaders, restricting religious attire, and regulating religious education. Political control. Rahman's regime is characterized by a high degree of clientelism and corruption. His family and close associates control many of the country's major businesses. Elections under his rule have been criticized for lacking fairness and transparency. National unity and stability. Following the civil war, Rahman has emphasized national unity and stability. He has promoted a secular state and taken steps to integrate various ethnic and regional groups into the national framework. Cultural policies. Rahman has also promoted Tajik culture and identity, including efforts to revive and celebrate Persian heritage. This includes the promotion of the Tajik language and cultural symbols. These policies reflect Rahman's approach to maintaining control and stability in Tajikistan. The issue of banning the hijab is indeed a complex and sensitive one, touching on various aspects of human rights, freedom of religion, and cultural identity. Here are some key points to consider. Freedom of religion and expression. Banning the hijab can be seen as a violation of women's rights to freely practice their religion and express their cultural identity. For many Muslim women, wearing the hijab is a deeply personal and spiritual choice. Autonomy and choice. Such bans can undermine women's autonomy by restricting their ability to make personal decisions about their attire. This can be perceived as a form of control over women's bodies and choices. Arguments for secularism. Proponents of hijab bans often argue that they are necessary to maintain secularism and neutrality in public spaces, especially in countries with a strong secular tradition. They may also argue that such measures are intended to promote gender equality and prevent coercion. Impact on social inclusion. Banning the hijab can lead to social exclusion and discrimination against Muslim women, making it harder for them to participate fully in public life, including education and employment. Legal and human rights perspectives. International human rights organizations often criticize hijab bans as discriminatory and a violation of fundamental rights. They argue that such policies disproportionately affect Muslim women and can perpetuate stereotypes and prejudice. The balance between secularism, security, and individual freedoms is a delicate one, and different countries approach it in various ways. It's important to consider the perspectives and experiences of the women directly affected by these policies.
So what's the takeaway from all of this? While Tajikistan may be predominantly Muslim, the expression of that faith is shaped heavily by government involvement. There's tension between a strong historical tradition and authoritarian control. When you control everything and corruption is practiced, and yet human rights violations are dominant, this makes Tajikistan a unique case study of how banning practice of religion, culture, and politics can intertwine. It opens up important conversations about faith, freedom, and the future of religious expression.